Gold and silver are real money. It says so right in the US Constitution. Yet somehow there are states that are still imposing sales taxes when you buy gold and silver. And what's even worse is there are a few states that didn't have sales taxes on gold and silver that are now bringing it back. And that is really unfortunate to hear, but there is an organization that has been fighting this for over a decade, and they've done a lot of great work, like repealing sales taxes in Arkansas and other states very recently. So we are going to be talking to him today and finding out exactly what's going on with all of these taxes on gold and silver. And his name is JP Cortez. He is the executive director of the Sound Money Defense League. Now, just so you know, this post is not sponsored by them at all. They didn't pay me a dime, but I believe in what they're doing, and you should as well. So I want you to hear what he had to say and hear how we can fight taxes on gold and silver. But first, do me a favor. If you like videos like this and want to learn more about gold and silver, go down below and make sure you are subscribed. My channel is sponsored by sdbullion.com. New customers can get their first order of gold or silver at spot by going to sdbullion.com/new. Hey everybody, welcome back. We are joined today by JP Cortez. JP is the executive director of the Sound Money Defense League. Now, JP, can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do and what that means?
Hey, Seeker, good to be with you. The Sound Money Defense League is a national nonpartisan group that was established in 2014 with support from Money Metals Exchange, the national online precious metals dealer. And we go state to state remonetizing constitutional money. We looked at the state of play in 2014 and decided that, and we realized that there were a lot of places where policy could fix some of the errors impacting gold and silver investors. There's everything from sales tax to income tax to various other taxes. There are regulations, all sorts of disincentives that make it impossible for individuals to adopt their own gold standard today. So we go state to state and to the federal level, introducing and ultimately passing legislation that brings states closer to constitutional alignment, because as you know, the gold and silver are the only form of money mentioned in the US Constitution. And it allows, again, it frees gold and silver. It unlocks their potential, not just as a store of value, but potentially as money as well.
For sure. And speaking of sales taxes, were you part of the team that actually helped with the repeal of sales taxes on gold and silver in states like Arkansas?
Yeah. So the Arkansas bill was ours. That was Senate Bill 336, I think in 2021, if I remember right, with Senator Mark Johnson. I flew out to Little Rock. I testified at that committee. And since then, Arkansas has also eliminated their capital gains tax. So yeah, Arkansas was a good example of one of these projects that, you know, admittedly, it was a multi-year project at first, but once that first domino fell, the floodgates open and sound money legislation seems to funnel down the pipe. That's true in Arkansas. It's also true in states like Tennessee, where we originally removed the sales tax on precious metals, I believe in 2021 as well. And then after that, eliminating the income tax. And just now, I was in Nashville 2 weeks ago testifying on a bill for Tennessee to establish a $65 million physical gold reserve, physical metals stored in their state. So these are just a couple examples of some of the projects that we've been working on since 2014.
Well, I will say this. I commend you guys for doing that, because there should be no sales tax or capital gains tax on gold and silver, in my opinion.
Oh, completely, right? It's asinine to do this the way you're only exchanging one form of money for another. The way if you walked into a gas station and you asked the clerk to change one paper dollar bill for 4 quarters, you wouldn't expect to be taxed on that transaction, because why would you? It's just an exchange of one form of money for another. But in a couple of states now, fortunately, there are far fewer than when we started, but still in a handful of states, when you walk into your local coin store or buy online and have it shipped to your house in Vermont, Maine, Hawaii, just to name a few, New Mexico, they're going to charge you a 5, 6, 7% sales tax when you buy it. And then most of these states are also going to charge you a capital gains tax when you sell it at the state level and the federal level. So to be sure, you know, gold and silver as an investment, gold and silver as money, these things didn't die. It's not that they failed. It's that politicians burdened them with regulations and taxation that made it impossible for them to function, to do their original purpose.
Yeah, if there's anything politicians are good at, it's taxing people and finding new ways to do so. Just for example, in Washington, I mentioned this in the intro, Senate Bill 5794, there was a huge budget shortfall in Washington state. And all of a sudden, there's this bill that is allowing taxation on gold and silver once again. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The story in Washington is unfortunately not a positive one. For many years now, I personally have been flying out to Olympia because for several years, for several legislative sessions in a row now, Washington has considered legislation to impose a sales tax on precious metals and to impose a B&O tax on precious metals dealers, on bullion dealers in the state. Fortunately, for the last several attempts, we've been able to engage the lawmakers and stir up enough grassroots flames to make sure that these efforts to impose these taxes were stopped. Unfortunately, this year, we've found that in Washington and in a couple of other states, lawmakers are talking about and passing legislation that imposes these sales taxes. In Washington's case, it is the case that they are facing a $16 billion shortfall. So they're facing this fiscal cliff. They don't have money. I saw that the governor released a statement thanking the legislature for looking at every single tax exemption that exists on the books today, high and low, and removing them. The positive, the small silver lining there, no pun intended, is that this wasn't an outright assault on sound money. It was not a targeted takedown of the gold and silver precious metals exemption. This was a blanket exemption that was caught up in a blanket bill that addressed many exemptions. So now the goal is going to be convincing these lawmakers that they made a huge mistake. We've done it before. There's precedent. In Louisiana, in the mid-2010s, Louisiana passed an exemption and then they repealed it. Upon a year later of repealing it, they realized that dealers had their boots on their neck. They were unable to operate when this tax was imposed. Conventions, coin shows, all of these tourism dollars were leaving the state. And the state brutally had to find out that, kind of backwards thinking, but by imposing this tax, they actually lost more revenue because commercial business, dealers, brick and mortar stores left the state. So Louisiana was an example of a state that imposed a tax and then literally the next year reversed course. Ohio has done that as well, where we've gone in, we had to fight for the exemption at first, then we had to fight a repeal attempt that unfortunately didn't go our way, and then we had the law reimposed, the sales tax exemption reimposed. So some of this is a constant fight with lawmakers, some of it's constant education. But in the case of Washington, and unfortunately Maryland and Virginia as well, the lawmakers there see an industry like gold and silver coin dealers, and they see potential revenue dollars. They're not thinking about the second and third order effects. They're thinking about their own state coffers and how they can raise more dollars for the state. So we need to inform them that they're misguided on what they think they're going to raise, that they're losing revenue to the states that are neighboring them that have already eliminated these taxes. And I'm sure that's what we'll do.
So you said it wasn't just Washington and Virginia. What was the other state?
Maryland.
Maryland is. So are these all bills that are in Senate right now in Maryland and Virginia? Okay.
These are bills that, so in the case of Maryland, in the case of Virginia, their bill had a sunset clause written into it. And we worked this year to introduce, and we did introduce legislation to extend that sunset clause. And unfortunately, that bill was killed. And so the legislature, the Democratic-controlled legislature, decided simply to let the exemption be sunset. So next year, we'll be introducing legislation to reintroduce the exemption. In Maryland, they did include the exemption explicitly in a blanket bill that included a lot of other exemptions. So that just wasn't a sunset that was allowed to pass. I do find it a little bit interesting when you look at these states that are close to the capital, close to Washington, D.C. These are states that are at least, in places like Northern Virginia and places like different parts of Maryland. These are places that are filled with government employees. The industry there is government sustained. And in a new administration that has cut some of this funding, it's interesting to see that these are the states that are now actively looking at ways to further pillage their people and further extract wealth from them in the form of taxes, even on the only form of money mentioned in the Constitution, the only real hedge against inflation that people still have.
What exactly can, let's say if you live in Virginia, Maryland, or Washington, what exactly can you do to help fight these bills? Like just call your senator, or was there something they can do farther than that?
Well, you can definitely call your senator, and I encourage you to do so. And you can also go to the Sound Money Defense League's website and sign up for our list. We ask you for your email address and your zip code, and we categorize all of our entire list by zip code. That way, for example, if you live in Virginia and a bill like this comes up, you can be sure that you'll receive an action alert from me, directly from me, giving you the rundown on what the legislation is, what it does, and then contact information for key members of the legislature, the decision makers that are going into a crucial vote. We provide their names, their email addresses, their phone numbers. In many cases, I even write out a pre-written message. I code it out so that all of the legislators' email addresses are already linked in. So you literally just have to click a link that says, click here to email all your legislators. A pre-populated message will come up, you put your name on it, and you send it off. And ultimately, like Seeker, that's such a understated part of these legislative battles. The strongest tool that the Sound Money Defense League has is our grassroots support. With the help of Money Metals, we're able to leverage a customer list of people who are deeply interested, who are people who are impacted by taxes on precious metals. And more than, I've mentioned we've been doing this for coming up, I guess, on 12 years now. I can list off the top of my head more than a handful of instances where in Tennessee on the House floor, a representative came out and said, wow, this is, I'm going to vote yes for this sound money bill. And also I want to thank all or half of the state of Tennessee who reached out to us about this legislation. In Alabama, on the Senate floor, they're saying things like, this is the most important bill of the session for us in terms of the crowd, in terms of the citizen engagement to this bill, more than bills about taxes or guns or drugs or whatever it is, more than any of those issues. We're creating enough grassroots flames to reach up and make sure that these sound money bills are a priority to these legislators who might not necessarily know what sound money is, who might not have ever considered questions about what makes good money, what properties or qualities do you want your money to have versus properties or qualities that you might not want your money to have. And so we're engaging these lawmakers at their level. We're letting their grassroots, their constituents, reach out to them and urge them to vote in favor of this bill. And I can tell you, more than one of these, probably more than 5, more than 10 of these, of the more than 30 bills that we've been a part of passing, have passed in large part, because of the grassroots. It's such a crucial tool, being an active participant in your state legislature. If you take nothing away to anyone listening, please take away that you that you have a voice in your state legislature. And I encourage you to be an active participant there, because in Washington, D.C., you might call your congressman, you might get a response back. It's probably a form response. It might be written by an aide or an intern. But in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Atlanta, Georgia, Nashville, Tennessee, Little Rock, Arkansas, in any of these states, in those Capitol buildings, you have power. So voice that power by making phone calls, sending emails, because that literally is the difference between ending sales tax, ending capital gains tax, allowing the state to establish a gold reserve fund for themselves, reaffirming gold and silver as constitutional legal tender, or not doing any of those things.
Absolutely. And I would even argue that people from all 50 states should be on this list, because you never know when something's going to pop up in your state. And you guys will track anything happening in all 50 states. So if anything happens, for example, in Missouri, I'll get notified, right?
That's exactly right. And having done this for so long, and now having contacts in each state, and now having a very refined process, if there's a bill related to sound money that's introduced in any of the 50 states or in Washington, D.C., we know about it. And we are actively asking people to take action on it. And so on the state level, again, like you mentioned, states that are very poor on the issue of sound money, states like Maine and Vermont, for example, that have high states of taxation, versus states like Wyoming and Utah and Idaho that have passed legislation to end all taxes, that have reaffirmed gold and silver as constitutional legal tender, that have bought millions of dollars of physical gold to de-dollarize the state's balance sheet. These are the states that, we're working in every single one of these states, whether you're the very best on this issue or you are yet to take a step. So if you're in any of these states, I encourage you to reach out on our website. And I would also like to show the Sound Money Index, which is a yearly scorecard that we publish every year for, I believe this is our 8th edition of the Sound Money Index, where we rank all 50 states using a number of different criteria. Here's the chart that ranks all 50 states. And you can then determine which states have the best sound money environments and which states you want to avoid if sound money is a priority for you. I am so fortunate to say that I've had people reach out to me who tell me that they have moved their entire business. They've uprooted their family and moved based on this scorecard that ranks all 50 states and the policies that we've been able to enact across the country.
Well, what about on the federal level? Because even if we eliminate sales taxes on all 50 states, we still have to deal with federal capital gains tax, which is also unconstitutional, in my opinion. Are you guys doing anything about that?
Well, the federal capital gains tax is probably the largest government impediment currently existing to people using gold and silver as money, right? Because the federal capital gains tax exists, and because the federal capital gains tax exists and most states start their tax process using the federal number, most states impose this tax too. So of course, like I mentioned, we're doing this at the state level. We're now at 14 states that have eliminated the state capital gains tax. But even in those 14 states, if you're using gold and silver as money and you're using and you enjoy a quote unquote gain, a nominal gain from the price of when you bought it to the price of when you sold it, then you technically owe the federal government a tax on that gain. So removing that tax would, in one foul swoop, remove it at the federal level and at the state level. So it would be highly impactful to do this. Fortunately, yes, we have been working on this. Most recently in 2024, Congressman Alex Mooney from West Virginia introduced the Monetary Metals Tax Neutrality Act. This is a bill that simply backs out capital gains from your federal tax return. And like I mentioned, this would then trickle down to the state level, which would then automatically remove it from the state tax return as well in most states. So on the state level, that's a huge thing that we would do. And that would be a huge point of friction to remove as far as people's ability to use gold and silver transactionally or as money. Other legislation that we're working on the federal level includes Fort Knox. This audit, I'm sure you've heard about it. You may have done a video about it recently. That's been all the news, all the buzz. Everyone from President Trump to Elon Musk to Rand Paul to Mike Lee, they've been talking about opening the doors and doing an audit on gold, on the gold in Fort Knox. Fortunately, the Sound Money Defense League is in strong support of these efforts. And that's why, since our inception, we've been working on legislation to do just this. In 2019 and in 2021, we worked with, again, Congressman Alex Mooney from West Virginia to introduce the Gold Reserves Transparency Act. This was modeled after the original Ron Paul legislation from several decades ago that called for an audit of America's gold, not just in Fort Knox, but in all of the places where America's gold is purportedly stored. That's New York, Denver, West Point, any of these places where America's gold might be stored. We want a full audit of that. That was introduced in 2019 and 2021. And with all of this recent fervor, we've been actively, very recently, in talks with members of Congress to introduce a new bill, a new edition, hopefully introduced here very soon in the next couple of weeks. The Gold Reserve Transparency Act, this version of it, would calls for a full inventory. Of course, we need to know that the bars are physically there. We want to ensure that. It also calls for a full assay. Not only do I want to ensure that the bars are there, I want to make sure that they're not plated with tungsten. I want to make sure, I want to make sure that they're not gold-plated tungsten bars. I want to make sure that the center of these bars is in fact the gold that it claims to be. We then are calling for, on top of a full inventory and audit, a full accounting of all of the transactions involving America's gold over the last 50 years. You know, whether the gold is physically there or not is one question. But if it is there, who owns it? Has it been swapped? Has it been leased? Is it encumbered in any way, in any other financial transaction or derivative of some sort? Who owns it? Is it owned by the United States? Has it been pledged? Is it the World Bank, the IMF? There are a lot of really legitimate questions surrounding America's gold holdings. And more than ever before, all eyes are attuned to America's money. All over the world, people are talking about de-dollarizing. Their central banks all over the world are stockpiling gold at rates we have not seen in recent history. And so to ensure confidence in America's dollar, to shore up confidence in the strongest economy in the world, we need to open those vault doors and ensure that the greatest monetary asset that the world has ever seen, gold, is in fact still there. And then once we confirm it's there, we also need to refine it. That's another thing people don't talk about often. America's gold holdings are largely made up of impure bars that don't meet global liquidity market standards. These are coin bars that were melted down full of impurities. So on top of confirming it's there, on top of confirming that we physically own it, we also have to ensure that we are refining these bars to make sure that they're market eligible. And we have to make sure that we're auditing this gold and silver, or this gold, regularly. Audits are not one and done. The government has been telling you, oh, we audited the gold in the 50s or in the 70s. We don't have to do it again. That's not how audits work. No private depository would be able to get away with that.
JP, I'm actually glad that you brought up the audit on Fort Knox, because it was in the news quite a bit. Everyone was talking about it for about a week and a half, and then it's basically all but disappeared. So is there actually any movement on that? Is there been any actual talk about it in government or anything? Or is it just been forgotten about?
I can tell you that there are actively people, members of Congress, who are excited about this issue, who are actively seeking to introduce legislation on this issue. Whether or not something comes of that is another question entirely, right? That would be the ultimate nightmare scenario, right? If those vault doors open and there is no gold, that would have the implications on the American and world economy. But still, like I mentioned before, everyone from America's neighbors to America's adversaries to individual United States are actively seeking to reduce their exposure to dollar-denominated debt, to dollar-denominated investments. And they're all coalescing around gold and silver. And this seems to be the sticking point everywhere you look. There's less confidence in all of these other financial instruments and all of these derivative assets. But gold and silver have no counterparty risk, and gold and silver have no risk of default. So more than ever before, or more than any time in recent history, at least, and you can say what you will about a Trump presidency and what that could mean, but he has said positive things about gold and silver. He has said it would be great to tie America's money to gold. It would be difficult, but great. So to be sure, he's a politician, but he seemingly understands that gold and silver are indeed valuable in a way that printed fiat money is not.
Agreed. And let me ask you, what happens if we open those vault doors and there's no gold in there? I mean, what sort of repercussions would there be if that happened?
I think it would probably be a pretty huge repercussion. I think that certainly not explicitly, but implicitly, America has the largest stockpile of gold in the world. And so backing America's might and America's force and America's money in some implicit way is our giant stockpile, our giant hoard of the greatest monetary asset in the world. If it were found that this were not there, the impact on the price of gold would be insane. The price would likely shoot up. I imagine miners, that entire mining industry would shoot up. And, there would be real question about the global, more than there currently is. There would be real questions about the status of the U.S. Federal Reserve note as a global reserve currency. It would make no sense. It would probably cause a hyper de-dollarization scenario where people are even more actively trying to get out of the dollar and treasuries because the emperor will have been shown to have no clothes. So yeah, it would be a huge disaster. And that's why it's important that the American government, because to be sure, that's not the government's gold. That's our gold. That's taxpayer gold. And Americans deserve to know that the gold is there, that it's been stewarded properly. And frankly, the people who are stewarding America's gold are the same people that have been stewarding America's money, which instills no confidence in me that these people have been doing it well or properly, right? They have the stewards of America's money managers today have not earned anything in the way of a benefit of the doubt. They have actively lied. They have politicized and perverted America's money so as to meet political wills. And that's why it's so important. And that's frankly why countries all over the world are saying, wait, what if there was a non-political money whose supply could not be inflated? And obviously gold and silver, being money for thousands of years, fit that criteria.
Absolutely, and I agree 100%. JP, the last thing I'm going to say here is I personally really appreciate what you and your organization does, and hopefully will continue to do. Can you give them, the viewers, any other information other than what we had said earlier about going to your website? Is there anything else that they can do to participate?
In general, I would tell them to stay in touch with their legislature. There's every state legislature has a website where every single bill that's introduced in that state in that year is uploaded. So being an active participant in the political process, learning, understanding a little bit about the legislative process. But I think most importantly, the thing is to act. During crucial times of key votes or key hearings, calling your state senator or your state representative, emailing them, mailing them postcards, which is something that we do a lot of by giving us your information. If you also choose to give us your address, which you don't have to do, but we use that to send direct mail postcards. So we'll send you a written letter with all the information that enclosed will be postcards on perforated paper. You simply have to attach a stamp on them. You tear them and you put them in the mailbox. So we make it extremely easy to participate. And I cannot overstate this. That makes more than anything in the world, more than me going up and testifying before a podium with a suit on and talking about sound money. More valuable than any of that is voices from people in the state making their voices heard.
Absolutely. I would say that participation goes well beyond voting every 2 years. So
Absolutely.
So guys, I'm going to let it go here. I want to thank you once again for joining us, JP, and I'm going to put information for the Sound Money Defense link in the description. So make sure you visit those links and go check it out if you're interested. And JP, it'd be a pleasure to have you on again maybe in the future.
Yeah. I would be happy to come on. Thanks for having me, Secret.